Welcome to another edition of AML Conversations. I'm your host, John Byrne from AML RightSource. And with me today, I'm very excited to say, is a longtime friend and colleague and partner in a lot of the work in the AML space regarding cultural artifacts and art, and that's Tess Davis. Tess is the executive director of the Antiquities Coalition. The Antiquities Coalition, among other things, combats cultural racketeering, both here and abroad. She is a lawyer and an archaeologist. And back in 2015, the Royal Government of Cambodia knighted Tess for her excellent work, which she still does today, to recover the country's plundered treasures. Tess, I know we're chatting. You're over in Italy now, so we appreciate the opportunity to connect. How's everything going in the world of cultural racketeering?
Well, it's a very interesting time right now. Of course, there are so many crises around the world where we are seeing, just what a serious problem this is, whether we're talking about Sudan or Ukraine, really anywhere with a cultural heritage that is worth protecting is at risk of that being used for crime. But on the opposite side of that, there's a lot of reason to be optimistic. We're seeing great successes with law enforcement and with governments and even with local communities fighting back. So an interesting time, an impactful time, I think.
There's a number of things I want you to update us on. I was proud to be part of your financial crime task force a few years ago when we crafted documents sort of pointing out in the AML world for the first time, not in your world, the importance of looking for alerts and red flags regarding possible trafficking of cultural artifacts and how that moves illicit funds. And so that continues to be a challenge that you guys have been leading. So there's been a number of things that have occurred. You mentioned Ukraine. I think a byproduct of that awful war that Russia started and continues is the obvious, people losing their lives, citizens being killed, all those sorts of things. But there's a cultural impact as well. And I know you folks have talked about that. So it's give us a sense of why, besides the obvious, what Russia is doing to Ukraine is causes a lot of damage in many other areas that we just might not be aware of.
Yeah, well, Ukraine is an example both of why this issue matters and also just very much the dark side of things. Of course, one of the many tragedies that is taking place in Ukraine, in addition to the countless lives lost, the cities destroyed, all of these tragedies, one of these many tragedies is the direct targeting and exploitation of cultural heritage. And Russia really, has written the book on just how many different ways there are to exploit cultural heritage, and it sees the value of this. And this is something I think that we as archaeologists or we as Americans, we don't want to put a value on cultural heritage. We don't want to think about the ways it can be exploited and manipulated, which I think sometimes makes it difficult to fight back. But, Putin has had a state strategy on this issue dating back, to the 90s. So what Russia is doing, again, and this is a documented state strategy from the very highest levels, they are exploiting cultural heritage however they can. They are directly and intentionally targeting cultural heritage sites. You will have seen these in the news in recent weeks. They're also looting and trafficking archaeological sites and museum collections and occupied areas. They're also manipulating historical narratives and also using the art market to evade sanctions. So basically any negative way that one can exploit cultural heritage, they're doing it. And so something we're trying to raise awareness of is one, that this is happening, that this is a threat that's unfolding in real time, and that we have to counter it. The United States has to counter it. NATO has to counter it. Ukraine is already countering it as much as they can from the top. Indeed, both Zelensky and Madam Zelitska has said that, this is a top priority for them, that this is what they're fighting for.
Right. Yeah, that to me is something, I know you guys have raised that with other countries and their attacks. We saw that in the Middle East, trying to destroy culture, and that obviously is designed to erase a civilizational history and that sort of thing. And something that, again, we would not have been as aware of had we not connected with your folks. Let's talk globally, and then I want to talk about the U.S. Globally, you were a participant in a series of stakeholder dialogues recently that resulted in the Rome Statement on Art Market Integrity. That statement is included on your website. It's a 6-page statement. I just wanted to pull, there's a lot in there, but I wanted to pull a paragraph, a couple quick sentences that I thought sets the premise here. And reading directly from the report, it says, considering the scale of the global art and antiquities market, even assuming the integrity of market participants, so obviously words have meaning here, right? Exposure to risk cannot be underestimated. We must therefore promote an interdisciplinary approach, favor multi-stakeholder dialogue, strengthen understanding, enhance risk awareness, and share best practices. So 2 things. One is, what was the genesis of the statement in terms of the people participating or the organizations participating, and what do you hope that can be used for? Again, besides the obvious, having statements like this that make it very clear that all the stakeholders know there's a problem, recognize there's different solutions. I think the statement also talks about some places where there's some statutory authority to do some things, other places there isn't, so perhaps best practices is a better way of approaching it. So give us a sense of that, because when I saw this, as you know, I reached out to you right away. I said, this is intriguing, this statement, and the fact that this was a culmination of several conversations, and I wanted to get it in front of our AML community.
Well, Unidroit, first of all, we just have to hugely give Unidroit a big thanks for using their platform to tackle this issue. So Unidroit, for those who are not familiar with it, it sounds like a UN organization. It's not, but it is an international organization. It's the International Institute for the Unification of Private Law. So they really do focus on, some very technical issues. And they're also the home of one of the main cultural property treaties, which is the 1995 Convention on Stolen or illegally exported cultural objects. So they've always shown a lot of leadership in this space. And of course, given the broader mission of the organization and the treaty, they're trying to unify law and other best practices in this area. And this is, of course, something that's needed across the board, whether we're talking about antiquities trafficking, but it's particularly needed for the world of financial crime because I think the international community is just starting to wake up to the fact that, yes, art is an asset, and thus crimes involving it are economic or financial crime, because we haven't been treating it that way. We've been treating it as if it's a cultural heritage issue, right, when really it's a financial and it's an economic issue. And the criminals have long realized that and exploited all the loopholes that exist. So I will say the United States, I think, is ahead in the world in enforcement on this issue. Our federal authorities, our state authorities are doing amazing work, but we are still behind in the legal space because other major art markets, the UK, the EU, Switzerland, have already brought the art market under their financial crimes framework, something that I know we'll be talking about later and is yet to happen here. But so Unidroit convened this meeting of representatives from law enforcement, from governments, from financial intelligence units, from the cultural heritage community to increase dialogue between these groups. And also, the criminals are working very well across borders, and we have to do the same. And unlike other areas, there's not a treaty in this issue. And the treaties that do address cultural heritage and even cultural heritage crime, they don't touch this subject. So more international dialogue is needed, more coordination is needed. And I think we're starting to see the start of that.
Yeah, we will talk about the U.S. obviously, but you're right. Obviously, outside this country, there's been much more rigor, guardrails around the art and antiquities industry. And as you know better than anyone, it's a global concern. So you can't really stop an issue. It's sort of like financial crime in general. You can have financial crime issues just within the U.S., but a lot of times it crosses borders, and you know that as well as anyone. So I think this statement goes a long way, and people should read the entire 6 pages. I went through some of the others. I read through the whole thing, and it is interesting how it sort of dovetails with the challenges that we've had, we meaning the AML community, to incorporate this area of concern under the laws and regulations here. As we both know, there was an art study done by the Treasury Department a couple of years ago based on the anti-money laundering law that was finalized in January 2021. So the study came out, and the study said, and I'm paraphrasing, big time paraphrasing here, basically saying that this is an issue in the art world, but it's not a priority. It wasn't necessarily a negative comment, wasn't a priority, but they were suggesting, the authors of the report at Treasury were suggesting there are a whole host of issues that we're dealing with. This one is a problem, but it's not something we're going to address right away. So we know that part of it. Obviously, you and I would argue that you can do multiple priorities. You can walk and chew gum sort of scenario here. But so we'll get to that. But what I want to talk about in the U.S. is you've done a lot of work, and they probably don't get the credit they should. But the Manhattan District Attorney's Office under Alvin Bragg and his predecessors have done amazing work in returning cultural artifacts. And I saw a recent press release about several that they did just in the past month, I believe, back in June, where they referenced the Antiquities Coalition and yourself as helpful partners in that space. So talk a bit about what the Manhattan DA's office has been doing over time, because I know they've been doing this quite a long period of time, and how you get brought in on some of these things in terms of adding your expertise and helping them return these artifacts.
Oh, well, the Manhattan DA's Antiquities Trafficking Unit, I guess you should call it the Counter Antiquities Trafficking Unit, but it's really unique in the United States, and it's having a huge impact. This was something that was actually modeled on the Italian Carabinieri, which their art squad was founded in 1969, actually a year before the major international treaty in this area. So they really set the tone for the world on this issue, and the Italians addressed this as an organized crime issue. And the Manhattan DA's office has taken that same approach, that you have to follow the money, you have to take down networks. And we're seeing the success of that in real time. At least the most recent statistic I have, and it would not shock me if this is not leaps and bounds higher by now, because no exaggeration, I feel like every week there's another press release of a major seizure or repatriation from them. But to date they've recovered nearly 6,400. So 6,500 basically antiquities, valued at 490 million. So I mean that's a substantial amount of, that's that's a huge museum in and of itself, and a significant amount of money recovered by, frankly, a handful of people who have other priorities as well. But they have been credited with doing much to clean up the New York art market. And let me stress that the art market isn't the enemy here, but what's happening is that the art market is being exploited by criminals because there are these loopholes. So we're not saying that, that galleries and dealers, we very much believe in a legitimate trade, but criminals are exploiting that, and this unit is targeting them, again, with great success. And, they've recently returned pieces to Cambodia, to Italy, Iraq, Indonesia. Some seized, some recovered from museums, some recovered from people who realized they have something that they shouldn't, that they might have thought was legal at the time, and then later realize it is not and want to do the right thing and have come forward.
I first got introduced to this when you folks invited me to a meeting in D.C., which I believe the Italian task force police force were there doing a presentation, and I was caught by, there was a number of stakeholders in the room, which included law enforcement and folks like yourself. But what was not confusing, but what was interesting to me is the question about, I guess the word is provenance, or people trying to figure out where the source of the particular artifact. You just mentioned that returning those things. Talk a little bit about examples. So if you have some museums, they're supposedly supposed to check where things have occurred. You have individuals that buy things. Talk about how stolen artifacts can either be held by a museum, a reputable museum, or by an individual collector, that sort of thing. And how have you folks over time just made it the cause celeb to make people more aware of those things? And some examples of how this would happen, because somebody like myself, and I don't collect artifacts, but when you go to somebody's home and you see something, and I do remember somebody raising this at that meeting way back when, and somebody said, if they don't know where it is, where it's from, something's wrong. And maybe that's too broad of a statement, but talk a bit about that, because I find that very interesting.
Well, what I first want to stress that, this is still a problem that's very much happening now. Pieces are still coming out of the ground, again, especially in conflict zones or areas of other crisis. But the United States has, rich, peaceful countries have a problem in this too. You can't police archaeological sites all of the time. And the same for, museum collections or places like churches or temples. These are places that are meant to be open to the public. So these thefts are happening now, and our organization really focuses on the crimes that are happening now. So I'm not talking about things like the Elgin or Parthenon marbles or the Rosetta Stone that happened way in the past, but what's happening now. And unfortunately, these materials are still showing up on the so-called legal and legitimate market. It's a regular occurrence to see a headline that an auction house or a museum has had to return one piece. And an example that's frequently listed, because it involves Kim Kardashian, is, at the Met Gala several years ago, Kim Kardashian arrived in this gold dress, and of course had to be posed next to one of the Met's recent acquisitions, which was this gold Egyptian coffin that it had purchased, I want to say, for $4.5 million. So a significant investment. The picture went viral around the world, and very long story short, it was eventually seen by those in Egypt who had been responsible for the looting and trafficking of this piece, had never been paid, and were quite grumpy about that. And so turned in others in the network, and that word eventually reached the Manhattan DA's office, which brought a case, recovered the coffin, and returned it. This, in turn, exposed a major international trafficking network that was sourcing pieces, not just from Egypt in the aftermath of the revolution and the Arab Spring, but also countries like Syria, Libya, and Yemen. Again, active war zones and parts of crisis. And also eventually led to charges, which are still working their way through the courts in France against the former head of the Louvre. But what I think it's important, especially since we're on a podcast that deals so much with money laundering, it's not just we're not just talking about trafficking. In fact, the physical movement of the object across borders is often the easiest part of this. What's really needed is to launder this is an antiquity, whether it's a gold coffin from, looted out of the ground during the Egyptian Revolution, or a Cambodian statue stolen in the chaos leading up to the killing fields, to take this asset and get rid of that dark history so you can get it onto the auction block at Christie's or into a display case at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, sometimes, with just a few years turnaround, and everyone thinks it's legitimate and legal. So we're really talking about, the bill and things like that are aimed at getting at the laundering of the criminal proceeds or using art to launder money, but these pieces are also laundered themselves. And I think a helpful way to think about antiquities trafficking is really laundering these pieces, into legitimate collections. Otherwise, the trade would not survive. It depends on that.
Interesting. When we worked together on the Financial Crime Task Force, we recommended that there be legislation and statutory authority in this space. For those that haven't been following this, where are we in June of 2026? I mentioned the art study from Treasury, obviously from a couple of years ago. I know some things have not moved. When we're recording this next week, I know that FinCEN is testifying before the House Financial Services Committee, and while this won't be a major focus, I know that at least they're going to be given the opportunity to or to respond to where is FinCEN in terms of their various priorities in what's happening from a legislative and a policy standpoint. Where are we with art and antiquities?
Well, right now, and as you know, this has been an effort that's been going on for many years, and there have been in the last 5 or 6 years a number of efforts to try to bring the art market under the U.S. AML framework. But last year, Senators Fetterman and Grassley, joined by Whitehouse, McCormick, Kim, and Cassidy, so a very strong bipartisan team, submitted the Art Market Integrity Act. And basically what this would do, if it is successful, is to apply the same standards to the art market that are already applied to, just about every other industry of comparable risk and scale. And so we're encouraged about this development. We're thrilled that it's a bipartisan issue. We think it should be. And we think with such a strong team of senators, it has a great chance of success. That said, if this one doesn't happen, I do think, this is coming at some point. The art market is a $60 billion industry. Again, the other major art markets, the UK, Switzerland, the EU, China is working on this now as well. They're all bringing this under the AML framework. It's going to happen at some point, and I think it'll be a good thing for the art market when it does. I think it'll bring, it'll help protect the investments that people are making, and also protect the individuals who are participate in the market.
As the Financial Action Task Force, I should know this, but have they weighed in on this? I think there has been some coverage. I don't know if they've done reports, but what's your understanding of what FATF has said regarding arts and antiquities?
They have warned that it's an issue and actually issued a great report breaking down just the different mechanisms that criminals are using to exploit the art market and the space. So it's a hugely helpful report using a number of case studies that really goes through and shows just how this is done, and also, unfortunately, how easy it is to do. Again, because we don't have these rules in place. In fact, there was one undercover case in the United States that exposed an effort to launder money through art, and they actually had the criminal on a wire saying, "Yeah, we were going to use real estate, but this was so much easier."
Wow.
Just because there's no rules in place. So again, I do think we're thrilled it has such bipartisan support. This is an important issue. The United States is the largest art market in the world, and that it will only help it to grow if people can have even more trust and faith in it. And so we think this is a positive for the market. It's a positive for the United States. It's certainly a positive for our law enforcement, as it'll give them eyes into this multi-billion-dollar market that they don't yet have. And we think all of that will be good for everyone but the criminals in the long run.
The AML community has all sorts of crimes that they need to track. They can't be experts in all of them. Obviously, there's over 200 plus predicate offenses under the money laundering statutes in the U.S. If you are coming in and talking to a group of AML professionals at a financial institution, and you just wanted to get them to be more aware of art and antiquities, the use of them to move illicit funds, what are some high level, I know the reports will give us a lot of this, and your task force report does as well. What are some high level red flags that investigators in a financial institution could see that may at least get them to file a suspicious activity report and have law enforcement take it from there? What would be a couple of things that you would say, hey, if these things happen, it could be an indication of illicit use of cultural artifacts to move illicit funds?
Well, first, just to know that this is a real and documented and growing problem. Actually, even since we did the task force just 6 years ago, all these new case studies have come up. There's now a Hezbollah terrorist financing case study, $160 million terrorist-related sanctions through the U.S. financial system using art and diamonds. There's the Rodenberg case, which were sanctioned allies of Putin, $18 million just that we know about, a recent conviction by the Manhattan DA's office on money laundering charges as well. So first to know that this is happening and no one wants to show up on the front page in the New York Times for unknowingly letting it happen. But you note a big challenge is that the art market doesn't necessarily have the financial language and the financial industry doesn't have the flip side, which again is why we think it's so important that the art market be brought into this reporting regime, because they are the ones who are going to be seeing the red flags. But I think just in simplest terms, to trust but verify. Again, I think people are often not thinking of art necessarily as an asset. You hear about loans approved and things like that, where no one even sees the art. It's a piece of paper saying that the art is held and the art is actually in the Geneva Freeport or something like that. So if you wouldn't allow things to get by with other assets without validating facts and information, certainly don't use that for art. And what we do need to do is to have more dialogue between the industries. And this is something that UNIDROIT called for in the statement and was also trying to do with this event, is that the people from the FIUs need to talk to the banks, need to talk to the art market leaders, need to talk to the museum leaders, need to talk to the art squads. The art squads don't necessarily know the people in the AML squads, things like that, because a lot of these red flags are very suspicious. With antiquities, there are things like coming from an area of crisis. You do have to have the provenance, but remember, provenance is easier to forge than an antiquity. You've got to trust but verify it. And with fine art, we're often talking larger dollar values. So again, I think people do need to. The art market is largely legitimate, but keep in mind how easy it is to manipulate the paper trail, to manipulate the objects themselves. One good source of guidance that your listeners should be aware of is the Responsible Art Market Initiative out of Geneva. And they do publish a great series of guidance for those in the market, but that could also be helpful for those working in a bank or something like this. And it's basically how to check the object, how to check the money, and how to check the individual. So you really have to do those three things. And they lay out a great checklist, short, but if everybody followed it, we'd have much fewer problems for doing that. So I highly recommend that resource and that institution as well.
Tess, I'll get you out of here on this. Given all this, and I think you've already alluded to the fact that you believe there will be some guardrails in the U.S. and there'll be more conversations between countries and treaties and that sort of thing. Just in general, and you also mentioned that these things are still occurring. Are you optimistic that things are starting to get better? Better being the goal of making more people aware. And I don't know how you measure success. Obviously, cases are important. People making decisions and museums making decisions to be more diligent and that sort of thing. And you can sort of measure that, I guess, but that's probably more anecdotal. But are you optimistic in general? I mean, you folks are doing so much here, and as a mission statement, you have to be that way. But how are you feeling in general? All the years you've put into this.
Well, I think there has been a huge sea change. When I started in this field, when we went into a government office, and this could be a government in Cambodia, it could have been in the United States, Europe, wherever, we had to spend the bulk of the meeting even explaining that this is a problem. I think people know it's a problem now. And I think people are pretty much, again, this legislation being bipartisan, I think people are much on board and wanting to fight it. So I think the political will is there and growing. And if that's in place, we can really achieve great things. That said, despite all the progress that's being made, we're still seeing this happen in real time. What happened to Cambodia in the 1970s, this is happening in real time to Ukraine, to Sudan. I mean, the looting of the museum in Khartoum, to so many places. And our response is faster, certainly, but we're not preventing these tragedies. So I'll say I'm optimistic that our response has gotten much better, but we're not yet at the level of being proactive that we need. And we're losing a lot in the meantime until that happens.
Tess Davis, thank you so much for both what you do, but also taking the time to share your insight today. The AntiquitiesCoalition.org is the website. It contains those reports, the various press statements that the coalition has made, and that Rome statement that we talked about on the front end. So thanks a lot for sharing today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you for using your platform to raise awareness of this issue. It's making a big difference.
Take care. Stay safe.